My name is Miss Smith and I'm really excited for our story today. It's called Curious George Goes Camping. Can you read that title with me? Ready? Curious George Goes Camping. You got it. But before we read our story, I need to know that you know about letter T because there's going to be something in our story that starts with letter T. So will you just say letter T 3 times? Ready? Letter T, letter T, letter T. You got it. Letter T is a consonant, and you make the sound for letter T by taking the tip of your tongue and putting it on the roof of your mouth and blowing out short bursts of air like this. T, t, t. Will you see if you can do that? Ready? T, t, t. You got it. Nice job. The sign language for letter T is pretty similar to sign language for letter N. Letter N is 2 fingers over your thumb. Letter T is just 1 finger over your thumb. See if you can do that. 1 finger over your thumb. And then you say letter T. Can you do it? Ready? Letter T. And then what does letter T say? You're going to bounce it 3 times and go t, t, t. Okay, what does letter T say? T, t, t. Nice job. So, Curious George Goes Camping. I hope you notice on the cover that there's a picture of a tent. Can you do that? It's a tent, which is something that George is going to need in order to go camping. So let's find out to this little monkey when he goes on a camping trip. This is George. He was a good little monkey and always very curious. Will you say curious 3 times? Ready? Curious, curious, curious. Nice job. Curious means that he always wants to know more about things. So this time, can we say curious 3 times, but scratch our heads like we want to know more about something, like curious 3 times. Ready? Curious, curious, curious. You got it. This weekend, George and his friend, the man with the yellow hat, had special plans. They were going camping. Show me thumbs up or down if you think you would like to go camping. Just show me. Okay, some kids say yes. A couple say no. I don't really like camping. I would say no. At the campsite, the man with the yellow hat unpacked their gear while George looked at all the tents. He saw tents for big families and one just the right size for a puppy. I'll give you a clue. It's on this page. At first I couldn't find it, but will you see if you can find a tent that's just right for a puppy? Point when you find it. Just point. Oh, ding, ding, ding. It's right there, a little puppy tent. There were even tents on wheels. Would you like to help me put up our tent, George? The man asked. My guess is that George will want to do that because George is curious about everything. George was happy to help. It would not be hard to set up a tent, he thought. But it wasn't easy. George, why don't you fill our bucket with water at the pump? His friend suggested. We'll need it by our campfire later when we roast marshmallows. Marshmallows. George loved marshmallows. He couldn't wait to try them roasted. Thumbs up or down if you like roasted marshmallows. Let me just see. Yeah, I love roasted marshmallows. A couple kids don't, but most kids do. Now don't wander off and get into trouble, the man warned. But George did not hear him. He was already gone. At the pump, George worked the handle up and down. Soon his bucket was full. On the way back down the trail, he saw a family packing up. George watched the girl pour her bucket of water on a campfire. The fire sizzled out. George thought that looked fun. He poured his bucket of water on the next campfire. Hey, yelled a camper, we weren't finished with that yet. The camper began to chase George, but George didn't mean to cause trouble. Now he only wanted to hide. He ran into the forest as fast as he could, but the camper's footsteps followed close behind. George ran faster and faster. The footsteps came closer and closer until suddenly they were passing George. Why, it was not the camper chasing George now. It was a deer. Will you say it was a deer like that was silly? Ready? It was a deer. Good. What fun to run with a deer. Forgetting all about the camper and the marshmallows, George ran after the deer. But a little monkey cannot run as fast as a deer in the woods. Before long, George was lost and all alone. He felt tired and stopped to rest. At first, he was worried. He was very far from camp. Do you notice how worried he looks to be so far from camp? He was very far from camp, but there were lots of other animals to keep him company. He saw a lizard sunning on a rock. That means the lizard was just laying in the sun on the rock. He saw a lizard sunning on a rock and a squirrel chattering in a tree. Chatter, chatter, chatter. Will you do it 3 times? Ready? Chatter, chatter, chatter. Good. Then he saw the tail of a black and white kitty peeking out from under a bush. He was curious. Would the kitty like to play? Except that's kind of odd because usually you don't see kittens in the forest. Usually kittens are in people's homes or on farms. So why would a kitten be under a bush? Unless it's not a kitten? Let's find out. Would the kitty like to play? George gently pulled the kitty out. But it was not a kitty. It was a skunk, and it was scared. The skunk lifted its tail and sprayed. Pshh. Will you lift up a skunk tail and pretend to spray? Ready? Pshh. Good. Ooh, the spray smelled awful. The animals tried to get away. George wanted to get away too, but he could not. The smell was all over him because the skunk sprayed directly onto George. Oh no. How would he ever get rid of this awful smell, he wondered. Too bad he could not take a bath in the woods. Then George had an idea. He could wash the smell off in the creek. George jumped into the cold water. He splashed and scrubbed, but he was still smelly. And now he was wet too. I don't know if you know this or not, but you can't actually get rid of a skunk smell just by washing it off with water. And even if you have soap, that smell will not come off. You need a special ingredient that I think maybe we'll see later in the story. Keep watching. But what could he do? George thought and thought. If he climbed up a tree to dry off, would the smell blow away? Thumbs up or down. Can the smell blow away? No. No, even dry and high up in a tree, George did not smell better. Poor George. Can you say that like you feel sorry for him? Ready? Poor George. He wished he hadn't wandered so far from camp. He wished he were roasting marshmallows with his friend. Suddenly, George heard footsteps heading toward him. Someone was coming. It was the forest animals, but they ran right by him. They had seen something scary, and George saw it too. It was a fire. Can you say it was a fire like you're kind of scared what's going to happen? Ready? It was a fire. Good. George had gotten into trouble for putting out one fire, but this fire wasn't in the campground. This was an emergency. An emergency means you have to do something right now or it's going to be a really big problem. Can you say, this was an emergency? Like it's a really big problem. Ready? This was an emergency. Good. Quickly, George climbed down the tree and grabbed his bucket. He scooped it full of water in the creek. Then, being careful not to spill, he climbed back up and swung from branch to branch through the trees. He's taking the water back to the fire. I hope he gets there in time. When George got close enough to the fire, he reached down and poured the water on the flames. Out went the fire with a big hiss. Can you do that? Out went the fire with a big hiss. Good. Just then, George's friend rushed out of the forest with a ranger. A ranger means somebody who works in the forest and helps the animals. George, he called, I was afraid you would be here. It's a good thing you were here, George, the ranger said. We saw smoke from the campground, but you put this fire out just in time. George was glad to help, and the man with the yellow hat was glad to see that George was safe. But he had a funny look on his face. George, he asked, what is that smell? Can you say, what is that smell? Like it smells bad. Ready? What is that smell? Oh, good. Back at the campsite, George's friend helped him get rid of the awful smell. After a strange bath in tomato juice, George smelled fine. So if you ever get sprayed by a skunk, remember, soap and water won't get rid of the smell, but tomato juice will. Then the man with the yellow hat invited the ranger to cook dinner with them over their own small campfire. Fires can be nice if you're careful, said the ranger. And you can see that they're roasting their marshmallows. Fires can be nice if you're careful, said the ranger. George agreed, especially for roasting marshmallows. George is so curious, but he saved the day. That was lucky. Okay, before you go, show me if you remember your sign language for letter T. One finger over your thumb and say letter T, 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 t. Can you do it? Ready? Letter T, 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 t. Nice job. Okay, see you next time. Bye.